Welcome to the Stephen Mansfield Podcast.
Well, welcome to the Stephen Mansfield Podcast. It's great to have you with me. So glad you've joined me. I want to talk to you in this podcast about an episode in the news that captures almost everything, good, bad, and ugly, I have to say about the Trump administration. It is a perfect representation of what's going on, from my perspective anyway, in the Trump administration. If you think I'm about to trash the Trump administration, you're wrong. In fact, I'm actually going to defend one of the ideas that hit the news that made Trump look like he was losing his mind. And then when he mishandled it so badly, of course, the whole thing just tanked. But it actually was a pretty good idea. But this is going to help you understand how I see the Trump administration and why sometimes I'm so frustrated, because he proposed something that was good and valuable, and then he blew it. So what was that idea? Well, you're going to be surprised to hear it. When Donald Trump said he wanted to buy Greenland, most of us thought we were looking at a Saturday Night Live skit or something, that he had just absolutely lost his mind. That came out in the New York Daily News cover piece called "Trump Wants to Buy Greenland." It broke, and the whole world went nuts. And because Donald Trump has got some serious personality disorders, he took it down the toilet from there. But let me back up for just a moment. First of all, my first comment on this whole episode was the fact that this story was leaked. Donald Trump talked to some of his advisors about the idea of buying Greenland. By the way, this idea was not original with him. This idea has been floated a great deal by those who think strategically about our security. It's been floated for years. It's been discussed in major journals. It's been discussed with me over a hamburger in D.C. by lower level officials. In other words, if I'm hearing about it firsthand, it's apparently a pretty common idea. And I'll tell you more about the reason for that idea, but let's stay on the fact that Donald Trump discussed this with his advisors in closed-door meetings, and it ended up getting leaked. Now, I got to tell you, if a president can't talk to his or her advisors in confidence, we've got serious, serious problems. Somebody leaked this. It may have been the butler. It may have been somebody taking dictation. It could have been one of the officials there. It could have been their wife, their children, their grandchildren. Who knows where it came from? We have no idea. Could have been staffers, but somebody leaked this to the press with the intent of embarrassing Donald Trump. And you cannot conduct policy, especially foreign policy, in that way. So Trump was discussing an idea that has gained some degree of currency in Washington. It was not unique with him, though I'm sure everybody's running for the hills now, even if they were advocating that idea sometime before. And it got leaked and made him look stupid. And of course, the way he handled it after that made him look even more stupid. And that's on him, quite frankly, that he looked that badly. But let me tell you a little bit about this idea before I go a whole lot further. I'm bugged that it was leaked. But the other thing is that it was leaked in a way that presented it as some harebrained idea of Trump's, rather than in a calm, reflective policy way that shows, hey, it might have some merit. You see, the fact of the matter is that Greenland is more part of North America than it is part of Europe. It's really important that we understand that. In the words of an article from World Magazine that I really recommend to you on this topic, they say it's more Canada than Copenhagen, because as you may know, Greenland is a territory of Denmark. So the catchphrase is, it's more Canada than Copenhagen, and it is. It's more part of North America. Its land mass dominates the North Atlantic, and 90% of its population is Greenlandic, which means North American. So it's basically part of North America, and its people are 90% North American. But here's the other thing we need to know. In our age of global warming and in our age of ratcheting up tensions with Russia and China, believe it or not, the Arctic may very well be, if not a battlefield, at least a tension zone for control of the world. It's very possible that in the future, our enemies won't come through our eastern and western coasts here in the United States. They may come down from the north through the Arctic, because as We have global warming. As the ice masses melt, you've got actual land. You've got actual land bridges that are beginning to be exposed. Many of them are rich in natural minerals and petroleum, things of that nature. And they also allow for strategic movement of military forces and for outposts and things of that nature. And so there's new opportunity in the Arctic. And of course, this may very well be, intriguingly enough, where a lot of the tensions come in the future, where a lot of the threat comes from in the future, where a lot of the geopolitical wrangling, the military wrangling, the power control moves come in the future, particularly from China and from Russia. Well, in that sense, for the United States, Greenland could be a hedge for us, a barrier for us. It's a huge land mass, basically part of North America, as I've said, and it could be part of a barrier against incursions from the Arctic. Now, again, I'm sure some of you are rolling your eyes and saying, Mansfield's absolutely drunk the Kool-Aid. I haven't. Hang on a minute. There are very, very few people in Denmark, though it is a massive landmass. In fact, here's a way you can think about this. The number of people who live in Denmark, which is a landmass, again, about the size of the U.S., approximately. That's probably the easiest way to think about it. The entire continental U.S. is about the size of Greenland. The number of people who live in Greenland is approximately twice the number of people who work at the Pentagon. About 23,000 people, 25,000 people work at the Pentagon, and about 50,000 people live in Greenland. Think about that for a moment. About 50,000 people, I think the actual number is 56,000. About 56,000 people live in Greenland. I used to live in Abilene, Texas. That's half the number of people who live in Abilene, Texas, for heaven's sakes, way out in West Texas. You think of an analogy that you've got. What small town do you know? 56,000 is a small town in America. That's the number of people who live in the entire landmass of Greenland. So the idea of that being purchased from Denmark has been floated for years, possibly better government, better strategic coverage, a hedge for the North American nations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, somebody has actually done the math to verify what it might cost. One estimate, very learned estimate, this is out of a Washington think tank, puts the worth at $533 billion, which is about the equivalent of 1 year's U.S. military budget. It's not that much, really, overall. So what I'm trying to say is this is an idea that has currency. It's an idea there's research behind. It's an idea that some people have talked about. It may be harebrained to you. It might be harebrained to me. But it wasn't nuts for the president to bring it up. It wasn't nuts for it to be considered. And by the way, the U.S. has grown substantially through purchases of massive territories from other countries. That's how we got Alaska, for heaven's sakes. So this isn't as nuts as you might think. And with the melting of the ice caps, with the melting of these great big ice fields, land is coming over. For example, Greenland experienced its biggest ice melt this summer. It lost a record 12.5 billion tons of ice in a day. 12.5 billion tons of ice. Now, you might want to debate with me whether global warming is man-made. But you can't really debate that there is a global warming thing happening. That's happened before in history. There is some debate about how much men are actually creating this, but there's no question that there is a trend of global warming happening in our world. Think about it again. Greenland lost 12.5 billion tons in a day. Well, so you see how this idea of buying Greenland had some currency. It's got some thought behind it. It's got some heft. It's got some depth. I mean, it's something that a good president, that a Security Council, the strategic people should be thinking about. And again, we're talking about a massive land mass with only 56,000 people in it. For heaven's sakes, that's. I watched the Notre Dame football game last night. There were more people at the Notre Dame football game against Louisville. Actually, it was at Louisville. I should say it was the Louisville playing Notre Dame to be more fair. By the way, Notre Dame won. Yeah, go Irish. And there were more people sitting at that football game than there are in the entire country or the entire landmass of Greenland owned by Denmark. So none of this was that nuts. But when it gets leaked, and it's leaked without supporting research because, of course, the press that hates Trump is not going to bring the supporting research in, all of that becomes a problem. Then, of course, you know that when the Prime Minister of Denmark kind of blew off Trump's suggestion as though he had made it formally. I mean, this is what happens. You conduct foreign policy through the press. When the Prime Minister of Denmark heard about this and she said, no way, that's not going to happen. He couldn't afford it. He's never going to get it. Because, of course, she's hunkering down and playing a nationalist game. Well, then Trump canceled a meeting to Denmark because he's small and, petty. And now we've got this little tempest in a teapot international incident over what? Over an idea that has some currency, not a bad idea. And I got to tell you, quite frankly, I know because I've lived in Europe and read some things and talked to some people. I mean, I'm not saying I'm any expert on the subject, but the fact is that they've pondered this very idea in Denmark. It's been written about. It's been in op-eds. It's been discussed. It's been considered. It's been mentioned publicly in times past by the prime ministers of Denmark. It's not something they're pushing, obviously. But, Denmark probably, if they were being really honest, would be thrilled to be free of Greenland, especially given the kind of expense and governmental problems it produces. So you see what you're dealing with. Not a bad idea. Appropriate for Trump to broach it with his security leaders, with his advisors, with his cabinet, with whoever he talked to about it. Atrocious that it was leaked. That then makes it an embarrassment. It's almost like I get up one morning and say to my wife, I need to drop some weight. Now, for us to discuss that weight and how I might eat fewer peanuts or eat fewer Oreos or whatever, that's a husband-wife conversation. Take that out on the street and have that conversation, and now I'm embarrassed, and that's exactly what happened. Then, of course, it's an idea that really ought to be considered. It's got geostrategic value. It makes some sense. It may never happen, and you and I might not even like the idea, but that's not the point. The point is it had some value. It had some heft. And sure enough, it had to get leaked. It had to be resisted by Europe, which is always hunkered down against any idea of the U.S., at least in the first 5 minutes. And then Trump had to act like a 4-year-old. And so this, to me, is almost a perfect picture of what's going on in the Trump administration. They're doing some good things. They've got some good advisors. They've got some decent ideas. But it's almost always mismanaged. It's almost always damaged by internal confusion and tensions and animosities. And then, of course, our president, who actually had done a good thing and even pondering it, running it by his advisors, ends up acting like a 4-year-old and cancels a trip to Denmark because the prime minister is playing the national anthem of Denmark against the U.S. And this is what happens all the time in policy matters with this administration. If they could tighten up and not have the leaks, if they would get what's the PR maxim that works best in D.C., get there firstest with the mostest. If he's actually going to discuss the idea of buying Greenland, then he should sit with some leading press interviewer, somebody big, do it on 60 Minutes and say as part of an interview, I'm even trying to think about how to assure America's future. And there's some ideas that may sound crazy to most Americans that some of the experts have floated. For example, think about this, buying Greenland. I know it sounds nuts to you, but suppose this, and this. If he'd done that in a calm way, it might have at least, some folks would still have rolled their eyes, but at least it would have been presented like he wasn't nuts. And like there was heft and support for the idea, which, by the way, there is even now. But no, it's got to be mismanaged. So we end up talking about the nutsy idea of Donald Trump buying Greenland, probably destroys the idea of this even happening, damages our relationship with Denmark and most of Europe, makes Trump look even crazier than he already looks because he did misbehave. And the cause, ultimately, the loser is the United States. Ultimately, the loser is the esteem and the security and the well-being of the United States because the whole thing is being mismanaged. But remember that where I began this whole podcast is in telling you this idea's got some possibilities. This is a serious idea, and probably it won't happen, at least during this administration, if ever. And yet, you watch. The Arctic is going to continue to be a place of contention, and it's going to bring Greenland more and more into play, and it could have been more and more into play for North America. Okay, my point's not to depress you. My point is to say this is what's going on. Those who are listening who work in D.C., let's work against this stuff. The rest of us, hang in. Some decent things are happening even during this administration, though Lord knows Donald Trump, I'm going to use a crass phrase here, tends to urinate on almost every good thing he does and leaves just bad feeling in its wake. So, again, I'm right of center. I'm glad for some of the things this administration's doing, but I am so weary of things going this way. Well, let's hang in there because there are great things happening and good possibilities, but Lord have mercy. May we have some adults in charge, please.
Stephen Mansfield is a New York Times best-selling author, a popular speaker, and a frequent faith and culture commentator on Fox and CNN. His groundbreaking books on faith and society include The Faith of George W. Bush, The Search for God in Guinness, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, and Lincoln's Battle with God. Learn more at stephenmansfield.tv.